everybody. Welcome to Perspectives. Good to have you with us today. Our guest is a special guest, and I think you're going to remember him from days gone by. I don't mean to make him sound old, but you know, I can talk about him. He and I go back. Chuck Hoskin Jr. is the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation and is our special guest for this show today. Good to have you, Chief.
Good to be here, Sam. Thank you.
How in the world do we get you to talk about the $3 billion the nation contributes to the Oklahoma economy?
It won't be hard. It's one of my favorite subjects. So this is amazing to me, Sam. I kind of measure things as people do in terms of their life. So I was born in 1975. That was around the time Cherokee Nation starts to stand back up. The government of the United States has unshackled it and starts to govern itself again, chart its own course, make its own decisions. In that 50 years, and I'm just here for a speck of it, the Cherokee Nation has gotten better and better, stronger and stronger, and its economic impact just keeps going up. So in 1975, if you'd have told somebody like my grandfather, we're making a $3 billion economic impact every year. We employ 14,500 people around the world. We support 23,000 jobs. He'd be amazed. He might not even believe it in 1975. But it's been a lot of work, a lot of people, a lot of leaders, a lot of citizens, and so that's what I'm here to report.
It amazes me that food sovereignty is an issue within the tribe.
Yeah, it is. And when you think of big numbers like that, annual economic impact, and then you think about things like our own tribal budget, which is now about $3 billion, and our businesses, which are multi-billion-dollar businesses, you think, and I think it's a fair question, how is there any want in the Cherokee Nation? How are there any communities that are dealing with things like food sovereignty? And the truth is it's complicated. A lot of it has to do with the kind of the contraction of rural America and rural Oklahoma in terms of services and infrastructure. So you still got small towns, you still got rural areas, you know, the stuff that politicians like myself always say we champion. Well, if we're going to champion them, we have to invest in them. Mm-hmm. And so what we've seen is really generations of disinvestment in rural America and rural Oklahoma, I think. We're in a period of investment, but we got a lot of catching up to do. And so when you've got communities that don't have food within reach, when you've got communities in which the average income is lower than we want it to be and educational attainment's still too low, we just got more work to do. So that top line number of $3.1 billion hadn't solved all the problems, but it's making, and it reflects, I should say, a lot of investments that mean in the generations to come, we're going to be on the upswing. I really think that. So I feel good about it.
It doesn't help when the average Oklahoman might pick up the newspaper or watch the evening news and get the impression that politicians in Oklahoma City would rather yap at your heels like an out-of-control puppy rather than work with the tribe closely. And I seem to hear that more and more.
There's some of that, and some of it in the most prominent place, and we've talked about it on this show before. The governor of the state of Oklahoma and the tribes in Oklahoma don't see eye to eye. We've been opponents on a lot of things.
Kind of like oil and water.
Exactly. He doesn't see the world in which tribes asserting their sovereignty is a win for Oklahoma. He sees it kind of as a zero-sum game, kind of like a business person might look at a spreadsheet. Well, this thing's up, that thing's down. Cherokee Nation's up, the state must be down. Doesn't work that way. There are a lot of state leaders who don't see it that way. I'm thinking of a guy who Governor Stitt fired, actually, named Ken McQueen, who is the Secretary of Energy and Natural Resources. That guy very quietly worked with the tribes and the legislature to combine, you know, those ARPA dollars, those American Rescue Plan Act dollars, to do something important. Water infrastructure for rural communities. And I'm not saying Governor Stitt was against it. I'm just saying that there's other people in the state that want to work with us. And so there's a little community called Chewy, and in your travels in the Cherokee Nation, odds are you went there. Chewy had a terrible water situation. Partnering, we solved it. Built a new water line. That's something most Oklahomans take for granted, that they've got adequate water supply, but it takes some work and it takes some dollars. So there are some state leaders that want to work with us, some members of the legislature, I'd say bipartisan basis want to work with us, but we have had difficulties with the governor, but we're making it.
It seems to me too that a lot of this progress could be traced back to the man-killer soap decision or act or law What did that enable you to do?
Well, this is what it did. It said that we've got a problem within rural northeast Oklahoma, the reservation, with water infrastructure. Chewy was one example. There's lots of others. We can wait on the United States to come to the rescue, and Sam, if we wait on the United States to come to the rescue, you and I are going to be waiting a long time. We might not even be here. So here's what we said. We've got record profits at the Cherokee Nation in our businesses. We ought to put them to what our interests are, and we ought to decide how to spend it. Now, Wilma Mankiller, my late great predecessor, just somebody who's an icon among really Americans, known around the world, she helped Cherokee people pick themselves up in the 1980s when it was time to look at just putting in water lines in communities that didn't have it. A little community called Bell didn't have a water line.
That's right, I remember.
You know this. And so she not only, it was born the water line, right? It was the idea that we can do it. Well, that same spirit is what informed us to say, look, we're not going to wait in the United States. We're going to put our own business revenue that we can put anywhere into building more water lines, fixing more water systems. And here's what we found. A lot of these rural water systems, which are really state creatures, state entities, they've been withering on the vine. Not a lot of infrastructure investment. And so do we own them? No, Sam, we don't. Do we care about them? We sure do. So we're putting lots of dollars, millions of dollars into that effort because we still have people that don't have adequate water supplies and live in maybe rural water districts that are just struggling. And so we're doing something about it in the spirit of Chief Mankiller. And Charlie Soap, who's still with us, a good man. I just saw him the other day, and he was a champion of that sort of thinking as well.
You know, a lot of folks don't understand that within the nation, there are folks who cling to what I call the old ways. And they're not gonna put up a strong resistance, but change is hard when you're really a traditional Indian.
It is, and here's what we have to think about the Cherokee Nation. For us, investing and saving, frankly, small towns, small communities, rural parts of the reservation is more than just nostalgia. It's more than just, well, we ought to be the champion for these small towns. It's really almost existential for the reasons you said. The folks who are traditional and still understand our life ways and our language, they're living in communities that are economically marginal, that are lacking in water resources, lacking in economic development. If those towns, Bell, Kenwood, a community we've done a lot in, if those towns wither on the vine, it's more than just, well, they're a distant memory. It is our language could be a distant memory. Our culture could be a distant memory, and we can't have that. And so that's the reason I mentioned Kenwood a moment ago. We built a $20 million community center there with a gymnasium, an early childhood education center, an elder nutrition site, baseball field. That ended up improving the water infrastructure in the community. We're going to do some housing there. That's a lot of money for a little speck of a town that the rest of the world forgot about. But for us, our people live there, people who speak the language, people who can perpetuate what it means to be Cherokee. And so, yeah, change is difficult. I think we have to go in there and make sure that those communities have a fighting chance. And the state's not going to do it. The federal government's not really going to do it. But the Cherokee Nation can do it. I think we can do it.
Can and will.
Can and will.
Does it ever occur to you late at night when you're all alone, about to tuck it in for the night, and catch a few Z's, the progress that you've made?
Well, I do think about that because we made a lot of progress. I think about it in two respects. One, that 50-year measure. I happen to be 50, and I was born in 1975 in this community in Claremore.
Well, you're just a puppy.
Claremore, just a puppy. But I think in 50 years, Sam, that's not a long period of time in the grand scheme of the history of the country. And we've done a lot in 50 years. Now, in the time I've been in office, 5 years, we've done a lot. We've had a lot come at us. We've all dealt with the worst pandemic, the worst public health crisis in living memory, COVID. We've dealt with our fair share of fights with the governor. But what we've done in healthcare, Sam, we're building the biggest hospital in Indian country right now in Tahlequah. It's going to double the size of what we got now. A little community called Salina, another town the rest of the world forgot about, but we didn't forget about. Tripling the size of that healthcare system, community centers, raising the minimum wage at the Cherokee Nation to $15 an hour, expanding our workforce, doing a lot of grassroots stuff, which I think is important to save the language. I think when I'm done being chief, I'm going to look back and be proud. I know I'm going to look back and say, boy, there's stuff left. There's lots of stuff, because there always will be.
There
But I feel
always.
like we've made a lot of
But you
progress.
guys have covered a lot of
We
ground.
have covered a lot, I think so.
Holy Toledo.
Yeah.
The water situation alone, I mean, that's an avenue that you just can't do without.
It is, because there's some communities who take this for granted, that the water's going to be there. And not only that, the water's going to be there to grow. If any of these communities hope to grow, add more housing, bring in a business, if the water infrastructure is here, that's the ceiling. They're not going to grow what they aspire to what they aspire to be. So those basics, which don't catch a lot of headlines, I mean, water lines are underground, nobody gets real excited about it, they matter. It makes a difference, and I think
Makes
we're
a
doing
big
it.
difference.
It does. Yeah.
Health issues. What are the benefits now for folks living a more traditional life who need better health care?
Well, I think in one respect, it's the same for everybody. We're all human. We need access to health care. People who I think are the most traditional, I would say, the ones that speak the language, they're disproportionately living in rural and remote areas, and they're living often economically marginal lives. And so what that means is a distance for you and I might be a lot more for them, in terms of getting to the clinic. We're thinking about how we can bring telemedicine to them in a way that might be accessible to everybody, but I think it particularly helps people who are, or maybe feel remote distance from our clinics. But you got to have infrastructure to do it right, which brings me to something else. Some of these communities, Sam, don't have cell service. If they don't have cell service, they're living in another era. And so we're putting about $40 million into new cell towers. Why? Not just because it's fun to pick up the phone and make a call or check out a website, because it might be life and death, calling 911, and it might open the doors to telemedicine. So I think telemedicine could be part of the future. The other thing is this: we're dealing with, in these rural areas, Sam, we're all dealing with it, but we're dealing with, I think, a disproportionate amount of behavioral health issues. We're dealing with some drug issues that are really troubling.
Everybody is.
Well, everybody is. And it knows no boundaries, it knows no socioeconomic strata. But I do think some of our communities that are rural and remote, that are economically marginal, that also happen to be where a larger proportion of fluent speakers are, where we're asking them, save the language with us. We got to save those communities. We got to make sure that we're doing more in behavioral health and drug treatment. And what we're finding is, in some cases, we can build the facilities, but we got to go to them. And the way to go to them is to bring people to them. So we've got a team called Speaker Services. Now, Sam, you and I could go out and talk to somebody who's a first language fluent speaker and say, hey, let's talk about your health care. Let's talk about what we can do about your diabetes. Let's talk about what your grandson is struggling with drug use. If a fluent speaker goes out and talks to them, or somebody that's a language learner, they're going to be able to do a much better job than you and I could do, because
Easily.
literally speak the language. And so this Speaker Services program is a way to connect to these, what we would say for this conversation, more traditional Cherokees. I think it's working, but it's something that's going to take a lot of effort, because we're talking about literally grassroots efforts of getting out and finding out what people are struggling with, particularly these people that are living marginally economically.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit more about this issue of the language, because I have a feeling it's threatened. We'll be back with more and the Chief right after this. Continuing our discussion with Chief Hoskin with the Cherokee Nation. Chief, is the language threatened?
It is. The good news is we're on the upswing there. The truth is most Cherokees are like their chief. They don't speak Cherokee. We've got about 1,500 first language fluent speakers left. In other words, people that grew up with the language, they learned English second. We've got, though, a generation coming up that's got more opportunity and I think more interest to become second language Cherokee speakers than ever before. So right now, We've got a commitment to language. If you measure it in dollars, it's about $23 million a year. That's a pretty significant
That's a
investment.
chunk of change.
That is funding an immersion program for even babies and little kids that's growing in size and going to other communities. Tahlequah's the hub. It's growing what we call the Master Apprentice program. So somebody that's maybe a young adult, maybe a little older than a young adult, has the aptitude and commitment to spend 2 years becoming on their way to fluency. They graduate from that program and then they go down to that little immersion school and they're the next teachers. Or they go to the other end of this building, and what I'm describing is called the Durban Feeling Language Center in Tahlequah, the hub of our language revitalization. Or they're going and they're working with Amazon to dub a Lord of the Rings series, which we're doing, into Cherokee. Or they're translating old documents or even new words. You know, when we come up with a new device or invention in the country, we've got to have a Cherokee word for it. And so they think of what the word should be. Keeping the language alive, that's the key, making sure there's demand for the language. Sam, I can educate a lot of people to speak Cherokee, but they got to use it. And using it as teachers, using it in the creative arts, that's part of the way we save this language. The other thing is something I touched on earlier. If we want this, the folks left who speak Cherokee as a first language, if we want them to be there to save the language, we got to be there for them. And if I see them living in communities that are withering on the vine, or their own quality of life is just not what it should be, we got to do something about it. So it turns out that housing is a strategy to save the language. Public health is a strategy to save the language. Behavioral health is a strategy to save the language. It's really all of the above. But we're going to do it. I promise you, in this century, by the end of this century, there will be more Cherokee speakers created than we're losing every year. And we've got to do that or we're going to lose the language. But
You know, back in 1943, there was a song, "How Are You Going to Keep Them Down on the Farm After They've Seen Paris?" How do you keep the young ones actively involved in the happenings of the tribe within the boundaries of the Cherokee Nation?
Yeah, it's the perennial and timeless problem of a new generation coming up and seeing a bigger world, and they're a part of that. Are they part of the Cherokee world too? I think we live in a day and age where increasingly they can do both. So again, let's take us back 50 years. 50 years ago, no one could have told my parents, hey, your son or daughter can be a doctor, and they can be a doctor at the OSU Medical School in the Cherokee Nation, and they can work in the largest health system in Indian Country, or a nurse, or any kind of other specialist. We can do that now. When I was a kid, no one could come up to me and say, look, there's a business empire that the Cherokee Nation has that spans the globe, and you could do it from your hometown of Veneta. You could be a part of it. We can say that now. So in that regard, there's a lot of opportunities to be Cherokee in ways that maybe aren't traditional, but it's part of the civic and business life of the Cherokee Nation. That's important. Culturally, though, we've got to stay in touch. And so I think as the culture is revitalized with things like investing in the arts, so we've got a multi-million-dollar plan to not only buy art from great artists, but encourage them to teach this generation coming up. There's great artists out there. They're young people, and we've got to get behind them. So I think we're positioned to have a challenge of what you described, which is a generation coming up and they're seeing the big world, but we got the resources and the capacity to make what it means to be Cherokee relevant to their lives increasingly. So I feel optimistic about that.
And
too.
the pressure's on.
The pressure's on.
The pressure, you know, it seems to me like there's such enormous pressure not to lose the traditions of the tribe.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, bow makers, blowgun makers, flute makers, things that involve seemingly the arts, which are actually part of the heritage of the tribe.
Right.
And yet at the same time, to support technical advances within the educational process. And I've seen, and you know I've seen firsthand when somebody walks in who's fluent with the language and can speak directly to a traditional Cherokee Indian about the problems they're having. They just light up.
They do. It's all the difference in the world. What I think is the world we're moving in, if we create it, if we want it, is a world in which these Cherokee communities, whether they're considered traditional or not, but let's take a traditional community, a kid growing up there, could live a life in which she could say, my grandparents and my parents spoke the language, my mother makes baskets, my father makes gigs and fishes in the creek. Or I can go off to college and go conquer the world of business or medicine or anything else. I think they can do both, because we increasingly live in a world in which you can do just about everything, from just about anywhere. If that anywhere is your home that you've lived for generations, we got to create a world in which you can economically survive and thrive and still live in a traditional community. That won't happen by accident, Sam. If we just let nature take its course, they're probably going to wither on the vine. But if Cherokee Nation invests in all these things that don't seemingly have a lot to do with culture and language, like water lines like we talked about, cell connectivity, some economic development, some education, the ability to work in any job as long as you've got a high-speed connection, just about any job, we can make that world possible. But we got to make it possible. We got to invest it. We can't just wish it there. That's why I always get a kick out of politicians like myself who say, boy, I love rural America. I love small towns. We got to do something about it. You got to put money into it. And that's what we're doing at the Cherokee Nation.
You know, I have long said Oklahoma is such an incredible state that you can be driving down multi-billion-dollar freeways, and off in the distance you see smoke.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, well, that's a farmer clearing brush. It might be a ceremony that predates statehood, even predates that.
It might be, and what we don't want is in this century for those things to be stories about a time that once was. We don't want those to be footnotes in a history book. We want that to be a live, living thing. And again, I think we have to be purposeful about it. We have to want it, and we have to have the resources and the capacity to do it. And I just think, Sam, I'm an optimist. I think we can do it, and I think we are doing it.
What's been the reaction to what you're trying to cover and bring into the tribe to enhance its growth?
Well, I think it's been very positive. I think sometimes when people hear about this economic impact number of $3.14 billion, you know, just like everybody else, to me, that's a number, and it's a great big number. And so on its surface, people might not get what that means. What it means is long-term investment. Yeah, we're measuring it in a year, but Sam, so much of this spending is about long-term investment. And so what we want to encourage citizens to think about is not what do we want the Cherokee Nation to look like literally tomorrow or next week or a year from now. What do we want it to look like in their lifetime, their kids' lifetime, and their grandkids' lifetime? That's really the way our traditional people thought. It's what Wilma Mankiller encouraged us to think about 7 generations
exactly,
ahead.
and you almost have to be a visionary to
Yeah, and so I think a lot of the investments we're making, you know, it's like you plant a tree that you won't feel the shade of, but you're planting the tree anyway.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like we're doing now, and I think those conversations among our citizens are important. Yeah, we need to do something for the immediate needs of the people, but we got to think long term, and I think we are. I think we're making some long-term moves.
We got about 2.5 minutes left, and in that 2.5 minutes, when does your term end?
2027, so I'm in my second term.
And you can't be chief again.
Yeah, I guess technically I could run again if I set out, but I think if you do this job once and you give it your all, two terms is all you get. We got a lot of great leaders, I'm telling you. Our deputy chief, Brian Warner, one of the best leaders around. So I'll just be cheerleading after this 2 years passes.
How many phones you got at your house?
Well, I've got one, but it stays busy. I allow only one.
I'll bet you,
Oh, for me.
I'll
Yeah.
bet you do. Well, you've been very gracious and very open with me over the years that I've known you.
Okay.
And I extend my thanks to you for that.
Sure.
You've never dodged a question. And I swear to God, I would never treat you the way the governor's treated you. I promise you.
You're a good man.
And in the time remaining, can you give me an idea of what might be in the future for you?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to do something, if I can, to contribute to the Cherokee Nation. I love this. You know, I started out in my career being a labor lawyer, and I love that because I like to help people, and that was a good way to help people. There's never been a way to help people like being chief of the Cherokee Nation. There won't be any other way. But I can help. I mean, I can contribute in my community. I've learned a lot. If the next chief wants to use me as a sounding board, I'll do it, but that's probably what I'll do, something for the tribe if they'll have me. If not, I'll go make a living somehow. But the thing that I want to do with the rest of my life is to try to make a difference. Sam, there's a lot of headwinds out there. There's a lot of rhetoric in this country that's really negative, it's divisive, And my politics is a politics of trying to bring people together as best I can. So
I
I'm going to
love
keep
the
doing
way-
that.
I love the way you've handled it, though. You've just let it roll off.
That's all you can do.
Thank you for all you've done and all you're doing, and I know all you're going to do in the future.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Sam.
Chief, you're a good friend.
You too.
We're all out of time. Thank you for being a part of it. We'll see you back here next time.